Welcome at this second lecture of Dutch history in paintings and maps. My name is Ton van Garderen and my company is Dutch Culture Tours for tours in the Netherlands and for lectures. The paintings I used for this lecture do come from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, their website, and part of that website is the Rijksstudio. So I'm a guide and my academic background is social geography. Social geography is about the impacts of mankind on the natural environment. Think about changes in landscape, think about urbanization. And if we speak about mankind, I think we can consider two groups, those who rule and those who are ruled, the rulers and the ordinary people. Before we enter into those groups and their impact on landscape, let's have a look at present-day Netherlands. Amsterdam in the circle, the capital of the Netherlands, not the center of government, that's The Hague. Province North Holland, Province South Holland, 10 others, the 12 together, the Netherlands. This was the situation about 2000 years ago. The whole area we know as the Netherlands was part of the Roman Empire. But 69 years after, things had changed. The north and the west were left by the Romans, partly due to revolts in the area known as Friesland nowadays, and partly because the Romans were more interested in Britain. There were minerals there. The Netherlands did have gas, but the Romans didn't know, and if they had known, then they wouldn't have reached it. So the Romans left the north and the west, and also this area just south of the river Rhine, which was the border of the Roman Empire in Europe, or in Western Europe. And in fact, the Romans only stayed in the very southern part of the Netherlands. In the first lecture, we talked about the revolution of the so-called Batavi against the Romans, revolution which took place between 68 and 70 after Christ. Initially successful for the Batavi, but suppressed by the Romans. 300 after Christ, the Franks have been invited by the Romans to defend that northern border along the river Rhine. The Romans themselves in the southern part of the Netherlands, and in the east we see the Saxons. The Frisians are still there, but only on a small part of their area. The wide area was too wet, sea level had gone up, and so not fit for agriculture and habitation. The year of the collapse of the Roman Empire, 476 after Christ, the last Roman emperor was replaced by a Hun, and the areas occupied by the Romans have been taken over by the Franks. And we see the Frisians occupying their whole territory again. This is the year 800, the year in which Charlemagne, the most important Frank, went to Rome to get crowned as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Holy because of the Pope, and Roman as a reference to the former empire of the Romans. And Charlemagne died in the year 814. One of his sons, Ludwig, became the new big man on stage, and he made a division of his area. For the moment he wouldn't be there anymore, between his three sons. And in the year 843 those three sons did agree on that division of the empire of their father and of their grandfather Charlemagne. And here we see the result: East, Middle and West Empire. And the treaty was signed in the town of Verdun in France, the same town where at the end of First World War the peace treaty was signed. So here we see the Netherlands in the northern part of the so-called Mid-Empire, which belonged to Lotharius. He was the oldest of the three brothers, and that meant that this title, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, went to Lotharius, which also had consequences for the Netherlands. Certainly it was part of that big Holy Roman Empire. Here we see the Netherlands in the 8th century, the Franks in the south, the Saxons in the east, the Frisians in the north and in the west. One of the ways of the Franks to integrate the conquered people, the conquered tribes, into their empire and culture was Christianization, the transition to Christianity. And that was done from the town of Utrecht. And from there, some missionaries went to, or many missionaries went to the north. One of them was Bonifatius. He didn't survive. He was killed near the town of Dokkum, at the time, of course, a village. And that was because the Frisians didn't want to lose their independency. They didn't want to lose their culture. So initially the relationship between those Franks and Frisians was not too warm and not too well. But bit by bit things changed, and especially when the Vikings became their common enemy. The Vikings came down from Scandinavia to plunder and destroy many towns in the Netherlands, and to tranquilize the Vikings, the Franks gave away part of Friesland, the area here in the north. Well, the residents of that area were not too happy with that decision, and local leaders started a fight against the Vikings, which was eventually successful for those leaders. The Frank were very happy with the result and rewarded some of those leaders with loans in the western part of the Netherlands. And one of those local leaders was Gerulf. Well, a couple of generations later, one of the offspring of Gerulf was Floris, and he got land in an area called Holtsland, woodland. In the west of the Netherlands, there used to be many forests, but due to ship construction and later also for the piling of the brick houses, all that wood did disappear. But anyway, there was an area called Holtsland, and this Floris called himself the Duke of Holtsland, and from there derived the name Holland. Okay, so initially Holland, part of the empire of the Frisians, later on an independent area. And here we get the so-called House of Holland and the offspring of Gerulf. And the last member of this dynasty who ruled for over 3 centuries was Aleid. She married to Jean of Avesnes from the House of Hainaut. So when Aleid wasn't there anymore, the area of Holland was given over to this House of Hainaut. Same kind of transaction later on to the House of Bavaria, still later on to the House of Burgundy, and last but not least, the House of Habsburg. There it all ends with those dynasties, because then we enter the time of the Republic, and in the Republic there is not a ruling family. Let's look to one of the persons at a turning point. Jacoby of Bavaria, and Bavaria, an area in Germany, but she was born in what's nowadays Belgium, in the area Hainaut, and from Bavaria only refers to the offspring, to her ancestors. And if we look to her strange head, initially you think, is that to keep her earth warm? No, it's to cover up her hair. And well, the story of Jacoby, her life was very short, only 35 years, but in this short spell, she managed to get married 4 times. Her first husband was Jan of Touraine, the son, or one of the sons of the King of France, but Jean died 2 years after the wedding. And very soon after, Jacoby's father died as well. Here we see him, William VI, the Count of Holland, Zeeland, and Hainaut. I know this area in Belgium, Zeeland, the southern part of the Netherlands. So Jacoby thought that she was entitled to those territories, but she was not the only one with a claim. The other one was Uncle Jan, Bishop of Liège in Belgium, but Jan was much more interested in worldly affairs than in religion, so he was very much interested in those territories. Jacoby knew that she never would win the fight with Uncle Jan without the assistance of a rich husband. So she decided to marry again, and this time to Jan IV, Duke of Brabant. Brabant is an area in the south of the Netherlands. We'll see later on the map where it's located. And Jan was rich, but lost his money in the many battles he had. And to refresh his financial flow, his cash, he decided to rent out Jacoby's lands to Uncle Jan. Well, that was not really appreciated by Jacoby. She left the country, she went to England, and there she met Humphrey, with whom she married. So that's marriage number 3. The two of them went to Belgium in an attempt to get back the territories and titles of Jacoby. When they came in Italy, Uncle Jan had died, and former husband Jan had given jurisdiction over the lands of Jacoby to the Duke of Burgundy, Philips the Good. There he is. And well, Philips the Good, he did do some good things. We'll talk about that later. But he was not especially nice to Jacoby and Humphrey. He challenged Humphrey to a duel. Well, Humphrey was not so good with the sword, so he denied the challenge and returned to England. Jacoby remained or stayed in Belgium and was taken prisoner by order of Philips in a castle in the town of Ghent. A beautiful town, but this was absolutely not a pleasant place to stay, this castle. So in the town of Ghent, in this castle, Jacoby in prison, but she managed to escape dressed up as a man and with support of, well, some of her friends. And after a quite stressful journey, she came to my present-day hometown, Gouda, and bad luck for Jacoby. She didn't see this city hall, this town hall. It was constructed in 1450, and she died in 1436. But Jacoby is on the front of the city hall, and she was received very well in Gouda. People sympathized with her and even were willing to assist her in the fight against the so-called Scots. In the time of Jacoby, there were 2 big groups in Dutch society, or at least in the west of the Netherlands, the so-called Hooks, to which she belonged, and the Scots supported by Philips the Good. So she found support, she won some battles, but victory didn't last, and eventually she was forced to accept an offer, a deal of Philips the Good. In the town of Delft was signed the treaty, and it had about 25 paragraphs, subjects, but the most important ones, after after the decease of Jacoby, her land and titles would be handed over to Philips, and during her life she could keep those titles and lands, but after her death to Philips. And also important, she was not allowed to marry again without the permission of Philips, because Philips was afraid that if from the next marriage there would come kids, that those kids might put a claim to the areas, the territories of Jacoby and the title, of course. So for that reason, no marriage without the permission of Philips. But then the only man she really loved came into her life, Frank van Borselen, from the area of Zeeland in the southwest of the Netherlands. true love, so she did marry and automatically lost her titles and land to Philips from Burgundy. And the last years of her life she spent together with Frank in this castle near the flower garden, the Keukenhof, beautiful site, especially in April, May, the time of the tulips. So that's where she spent her last years. Back to Philip. We see him in a kind of military outfit. Philip the Good from Burgundy. And let's look to this symbol, the symbol of the Order of the Golden Fleece, an association, or probably we should say a club, founded by Philip in the year 1430. And it was an association of nobility, of knights. Philip was the president. The club met approximately once in 5 years, every time in a different city. And whenever the Duke of Burgundy, so in this case Philip, needed soldiers or money, the members were willing to provide what Philip's needed. And for them, for those knights, it was really an honor to be in the club. At the beginning, there were only 25 members, plus the Duke of Burgundy as president. And during the later decades, more members were admitted, but it remained really a honor to be member of the club. The area of Philips, in France we see Burgundy, so we might call this the homeland of the House of Burgundy, the so-called upper lands. And through marriage and war, and of course also through the story with Jacoby, the House of Burgundy got other areas in what's nowadays Netherlands and Belgium. And well, those were the upper lands, the area of the good Burgundian wine, and those were the Netherlands. So that's where the name of my country comes from. And this is the county of Hainaut, which also became part of the Burgundian Empire, and the county of Hainaut, the area where Jacoby came from. And her second husband, the Jan of Brabant, the Duke of Brabant, that is this area. The situation in the year that Jacoby died, 1436, half of the Netherlands already belonged to the Empire of Burgundians, and we see some independent states or provinces at that time. The Bishopric of Utrecht, remember the Franks started their missionary work and their Christianization from Utrecht, so that became a bishopric. And many rulers donated land to the Bishop of Utrecht. So these areas, nowadays province Drenthe, province Overijssel, became a kind of dependency of the Bishopric of Utrecht. Then we have two other areas which did not belong to the Burgundian Empire. In the north, Frisia, and here in the south and also in the center, the Duchy of Guelders. At the end of Philip's life, situation has changed. The area which belonged to the Bishop of Utrecht has become part of the Burgundian Empire. Duchy of Guelders still independent, Frisia as well. The contribution of Philips to the administration and the legal system in both the Netherlands and Belgium lay in two activities, two decisions: the centralization of administration and the representation of people in the government, and second, the standardization of law. Let's start with this beautiful building, the City Hall of Bruges, Belgium. This is the place where the first meeting of the so-called Staten-Generaal took place in the year 1464. The Staten-Generaal was a representation of local nobility and urban upper class from all the areas belonging to the House of Burgundy. It started bottom up, so representatives of those areas came together without the permission of Philips. So initially he was not too pleased with this organization, but later on he realized that this saved a lot of time. He could deal with only one partner, the Staten-Generaal. He didn't have to make agreements with all the separate areas in his territory. So he agreed with the existence of the Staten-Generaal. Whenever he needed money, he counted on them. But the Staten-Generaal could say, okay, we are willing to support you, but A, B, C, etc. And this Staten-Generaal still does exist today, although it has another function and another form than in the days of Philips the Good. The second contribution to present-day Netherlands and Belgium as well was the foundation or the establishment of one system of law. If people in one of the many areas of the Burgundian Empire were not happy with the result of the local court, with the verdict of the local court, they might go to Mechelen in Belgium, between Antwerp and Brussels. There was what we would call nowadays the High Court, who had the final say about jurisdiction. And let's skip 4 generations. We go to the great grandson of Philip the Good, Philip the Fair. Whether he was really that handsome, that's up to you. Here we have Philip with the same symbol of the Order of the Golden Fleece. But I can tell you that he was much more handsome than his son, his oldest son, Charles V. But before going to Charles V, we have to look to the life of this Philips, and especially his contribution to the Netherlands, which was his marriage with Juana, the lady we are watching now, Juana from Castilla, the area around Madrid. And Philips knew that Castilla was a rising star on stage Europe, so he thought it might be a good idea to invite Juana to come over to Belgium and to get married to him. Well, she accepted the invitation. She didn't come alone. She was escorted by 130 ships. And when they counted well, there were 50,000 herrings on board, plenty of wine. So it sounds like a luxury cruise. But please do realize that ships in those days were not as stable as nowadays. So I'm pretty sure that she was very happy when she set foot ashore at the coast of Belgium. From there, she went to Lier, the meeting point, where Philips arrived one day later, and that same day they got married. Love at first sight. It sounds like a B movie with a happy end, but there was no happy end. Something happened to the brains of Juana. That's a nice way to say that she got a bit crazy. And when her mother died, Father Ferdinand thought that Juana was not fit to rule Castilla, so he did in her name. Well, her husband, Philip, the handsome one, Philip thought he was entitled to that function. That resulted in a fight between Juana's father and husband, which was lost by her husband, also because he died. And whether that has to do with this fight, nobody knows. Who will tell? But anyway, the situation when he died was like this. Juana was even more sad and crazy than she already was. She went with the dead body of her husband, with the coffin, through northern Spain. Wherever she came, the coffin was at her side at the bed. So when she woke up every morning, she could join her husband, although he didn't say too much. But anyway, he was on her side. And well, this was for Father Ferdinand a reason to lock her up in a castle in Tordesillas, and there she spent the rest of her life. One of the few visitors there was her son Charles, who would become Emperor of the Netherlands and other areas as well. Here he is, Charles. We know him as Charles V. In Spain they speak about Carlos I, King of Spain, but in the Netherlands and Belgium, Germany as well, Emperor Charles V. So when his father Philip died, Charles was only 6 years young, too young to rule, to govern. So his grandfather Maximilian of Austria from the House of Habsburg stepped in, although he delegated most of the task to his daughter, the Aunt of Charles, Margaret of Austria. Well, when Charles was 15 years of age, it was his time to govern, but it was not an easy moment to start, because 2 years later, Luther came up with his 95 Theses, an attempt to reform the Catholic Church, no split off, but just reform. But these actions or these theses were not appreciated, neither by the Pope nor by Charles V, who considered himself the protector of the Catholic Church. And the two of them summoned Luther to come to the town of Worms, and there they offered him two options: or renounce the theses, or be banned from the Catholic Church. And even more, everyone was free to kill Luther without being punished. Well, Luther decided to return to the east of Germany, to the area of Saxony, and thanks to the protection of the Duke of Saxony, he survived and he could go on with his work. Well, Luther was not the only founder of the Protestant Church, and I just forgot to say where the word Protestant comes from. After the banning of Luther from the Catholic Church, some of his friends protested against this decision, so that's where the word and the name Protestant comes from. The two other founding fathers of the Protestant Church, Zwingli from Switzerland and Calvin, born in France. Later on he moved to Switzerland, and Calvin was the one with most influence in the Netherlands. That's where the word Calvinist comes from. And the situation in the Netherlands is perfectly represented by Dutch painter Fenner in his painting Fishing for Souls. Here we see the Protestants, and on the other bank the Catholics. It's not too hard to say on which side was the painter. Look, the sun is coming through, the trees are nice green, people are dressed up quite decent, and on the other side all the reverse. And last but not least, this lady is trying to escape from the Catholics. She swims over to the Protestants. Well, this situation in society, the division between Protestants and Catholics, went on for centuries, but that will be one of the many subjects of another lecture. So for now, let's go back, or not go back, let's go to Erasmus. He was a person who stood in between those two groups, in between the Protestants and the Catholics. His idea, let's focus on what we have in common. And that's the belief in the triunity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, Erasmus, we know him as Erasmus from Rotterdam. I will explain why from Rotterdam, and also this question mark. And first we go to the map of the Netherlands. Here we see Gouda. That's the place where his father was priest, and his mother was the maid of that priest. So in fact, it's the place where Erasmus was conceived. Well, in those days it was a big shame to be mother of an illegitimate child. So mother decided to move to Rotterdam, where she gave birth. So that's the Erasmus from Rotterdam. And to mystify the story about his birth, Erasmus quite often changed dates, ranging from 1467 to 1470. Erasmus was also an advisor to Charles V, but at a certain point, Charles didn't want to make use of the advices anymore. He considered Erasmus too tolerant. And now it's time to return to Charles at a somewhat older age. And before we go to the picture of his abdication, just one of his famous phrases. He did speak a couple of languages, and in Spanish he should have told, according to the books, I speak Spanish to God, Italian to the ladies, French to man, and Dutch to my horse. So that's how much he appreciated the Dutch language. Thank you very much, Charles. This is the moment of his abdication. On his left hand, our right hand, we see Philips, his son. On the right hand, his brother, Ferdinand. Philips was rewarded with Spain, the Spanish colonies, so especially Latin America, but also the Philippines in the east, and of course the Netherlands and Belgium. And brother Ferdinand got far less areas which belonged to the former or the still existing Holy Roman Empire, so areas in Europe. The empire of Charles was enormous. It covered all the seas, so that's why we see Neptune, and here we see the ladies representing the various continents. And well, what we see here is, of course, an allegory and a not existing situation. This is the real situation, the abdication of Charles in the year 1555. Charles returned to Spain, or returned, he was born in Belgium, but after his abdication he went to Spain, where he spent the last years of his life next to a monastery at the village Juste in Spain. During the abdication he was supported, literally he was a bit crippled, by William the Silent, the hero in history. We will talk about him for a couple of minutes, but let's first have a little break. I will take a nice cappuccino and a Dutch stroopwafel from the town of Gouda. So Gouda is not only the town of the cheese, but also the cradle of the stroopwafel, which you probably know as the stroopwafel. See you in a couple of minutes. Time to go on. I hope you enjoyed your coffee or your drink as much as I did. So time to go on with William I, Prince of Orange. We also know him as William the Silent, because he didn't always tell what he was thinking. In order to create a broad coalition, you shouldn't be too specific about your ideas. So William, here he is on a somewhat older age, but let's start with his young age. He was born in Dillenburg in the county Nassau. In a moment we'll see where it's located. And William was the first of the 12 kids born from the relationship of his father William and mother Juliana. Both of the parents had been married before. 5 kids from those earlier relationships who also lived in this castle, those kids. So a full house, and I think William had a very nice early part of his youth with so many brothers and sisters around. Later on, some dramatic change came, but first we'll see where the castle and the county Dillenburg, or the county Nassau, was located. Here we see Düsseldorf, nearby is the town of Colony, Köln in Deutsch. So this was the place of his birth, Dillenburg. And now we'll have a look at his nephew, René de Chalon, Prince of Orange. And Orange is located in France, in the southern part of France, a beautiful Roman theater. Well, he was René de Chalon was the Prince of Orange. When he died, the title went to William. So suddenly he was prince, and that made him an interesting person for Charles V. You know, rulers need representatives and, if possible, blue blood. So nobility, higher nobility, and well, William belonged to the higher nobility. And what happened at the age of 11, we'll see later. First, we will get acquainted with the four official. There were also some non-official ladies in the life of William. His first marriage was with Anna van Buren. Buren, a village in the Netherlands. So Anna did have possessions, territories in the Netherlands. The House of Nassau already did have possessions in the Netherlands, but because of this marriage, that area was amplified, extended. The relationship didn't last too long, not because there was no love between them. It seems they did really like each other, but Anna died. Then it was turn for a second Anna from Saxony, the area in the eastern part of Germany. And well, at the time of this marriage, William was so much engaged in politics that he had no time to pay attention to Anna. So the love and attention she longed for so much, she didn't find with William, but she did find those basic needs of life with the father of Flemish painter Rubens. Well, William found out about this relationship and decided to divorce from Anna. She went back to Saxony, where she died very lonely, and that made the way free for William to get married again, this time with a lady from France, Charlotte de Bourbon. But also this story is dramatic. William got shot, and Charlotte took good care of him, but while doing so, she got ill and she died. William did survive, so we might say William out of the bed and Charlotte in the coffin, and William did marry again to an other French lady, Louis de Coligny. He got shot again at the stairs of a former monastery in Delft, the so-called Prinsenhof, Prince's Court, and he had told the nuns, well, your time is over, you have to look for another apartment because I will use this monastery as my house and office. Well, there he was shot by Balthasar Gerards, a Catholic from France, and according to the books, his last words were, my God, have pity with my soul and with this poor people." Well, that seems a long sentence for someone with three bullets in his body, but who are we to discuss to doubt about the books? Anyway, let's go back to the early years of William. And when he was 11, Charles came up with a proposal to William's parents. Your son can be representative of my empire in the Netherlands, but he has to get a Catholic education in Brussels. The parents of William sympathized with Luther. Well, apparently for the parents of William, a good job for their son was more important than religious ideas. So they agreed with the proposal. William went to Brussels. He didn't see the beautiful market square, or probably he did see the market square, but not in its present day shapes. Well, it's certainly the most beautiful square of the Benelux, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and I think also in the top 5 of beautiful squares of Europe. So he couldn't see the square, and neither nor the atomium and the little man freeing his waters wasn't there yet. What he did see was the court of Charles V, which we can see because it didn't survive the many fires. And there he became almost a friend of Charles V. And as you know by now, at the moment of the abdication of Charles, 1555, he was supported literally by William. And he told his son Phillips, make good use of William. He's clever and he's a good diplomat. Here we have Phillips, and he did what father told him, make use of William. So he appointed William as a representative. Stadtholder is the official name in the areas of Holland, north and south, Zeeland, and Utrecht. But 4 years later, Phillips fired William because of big problems, big conflict. And one of the conflicts was about Inquisition, the persecution and quite often the burning of those who did not agree with the Pope. William thought freedom of religion was essential. Another conflict was about the Staten-Generaal. You remember this organization which started in the empire of Philips the Good and eventually was legalized by Philips and became a kind of advisory body to Philips. Well, the voice of that organization, of that Staten-Generaal, was reduced by Philips to a soft whisper. So 2 points of disagreement, 2 of the many, and William was fired, and even more, he lost his territories in the Netherlands, confiscated by Philips. At that time, William must have looked like here, with his dog always on his side until his death. The story goes that when William was shot in 1583, that his dog didn't eat anymore and the little doggy died. But that's not too important to our history, or in fact the history of the Netherlands. What is important is that he returned to where he came from, Germany, and from there he organized military actions against the army of Philips. At that time, the text of the national hymn was written by, let's call it, the ghostwriter of William, and there it says in Dutch, but let's focus on the English side. I'm of German blood and I'm a Prince of Orange, and I've always honored the King of Spain, which was true until he was kicked out of office by Philips II. And well, William was not the only one who had problems with Philips. And in 1566, April 1566, a delegation of Dutch 100 members of Dutch nobility went to Brussels to hand over to the half-sister of Philips, Margaretha of Parma. Well, she didn't come from Italy, that was just a title. She was born in Flanders, in Belgium. But anyway, to hand over to the half-sister of Philips petition with more or less the same points, the same requests as Philips. And Margaret didn't know exactly what to do with this request. She sympathized with those ideas, but she was sure that her brother wouldn't be pleased with this petition. So she was making up her mind what to say, what to do. And then one of her advisors, probably the man standing next to her, came up with the famous words, Madame, n'écoutez pas ces gens, ce sont ceux des queues. Madam, don't listen to those guys, they are only beggars. Of course in French, because that was the language spoken at the court in Brussels. And from this name or word, gueux, beggar, derived a name of honor, the Geuzen, the group of resistance, most Dutch Protestant nobility, the resistance against the policy of Philips II. And those gueux we'll see again in this painting. The Spanish army, because the response of Philips once he reached or once he got this petition, was not to invite the nobility for a nice wine, for a nice drink. No, his response was to send the Duke de Alba to repress all the resistance against the policy of Philips in the Netherlands. And that army of the Duke of Alba surrounded the town of Leiden. And the Spanish thought at a certain moment there won't be any food left in town. They will have to open the gates and then the town will be ours. Well, they were wrong, because those beggars, they demolished, they broke some dikes in the area around Leiden. The land was flooded, not too nice for the Spanish with all the iron outfit on their body. They left the area as soon as possible, and well, the Gueux, they could enter the town by boat, delivering bread and herring, still on the menu every 3rd of October, the day of liberation of Leiden. William was very pleased with the resistance of the citizens of Leiden and rewarded them with the first university of the Netherlands, founded in the year 1575. Leiden was not the only town besieged by the Spanish, and at a certain moment, 1579, in the town of Utrecht, representatives from the orange areas on this map came together, and there they decided, if one of our cities will be attacked by the Spanish, the other areas, the armies of the other areas will come to assistance, to support. And that was the so-called Union of Utrecht. In that same year, 1579, the yellow areas decided to stay under the government of Philips II. Then we have mixed areas, orange and yellow. These areas initially joined the Union of Utrecht, but were reconquered by the Spanish, the most important of them, Antwerp. Good, so those representatives, 1579, 2 years later, they met in the town of De Hague here, and there they decided to send a message to Philips by letter, email those days, to send him a message that they didn't recognize him anymore as their king. And then they had a short flirt with the Count of Leicester in England, and Leicester, I should say. They offered him the crown. We need a strong figure, was the idea, a strong leader. But this Count of Leicester didn't do what the Dutch expected him to do. So eventually, in 1585, the representatives of the orange areas decided to go on as a republic. The republic was born 1585, and that republic would go on till Napoleon walked in without invitation, and he installed one of his 3 brothers as King of the Netherlands. Well, that will be subject of one of the many other lectures. In a moment we'll talk about those other lectures, but let's come to a kind of conclusion, summary, the importance of William of Orange for the political developments of the Netherlands. Well, first of all, he did finance an army fighting against Philips II, and probably even more important, he inspired many groups in society, not only nobility but also the ordinary citizens, to revolt against the Spanish government. Good, then the lectures 3 to 6. Yes, still many lectures to come. They will all be by Zoom. Lecture 3 is about the people. Today we spoke about the leaders, the ruling class, but lecture 3 will be dedicated to the people. And then we talk about time from the Romans to the Republic, so 1.5 millennium. and we talk about the beginnings, the Franks, the Saxons, the Frisians, the Batavians. What did they do for a living? Initially only agriculture, later also trade. We'll see why this shift of activity. We'll talk about the size of population. And in that same lecture 3, we will talk about the impact of the rulers and the people on the natural environment, the change from nature to a more cultivated landscape, and also urbanization. Lecture 4 is about power and conflict during the Republic, 1585 till 1806, when one of the brothers of Napoleon becomes a king. And this power and conflict in the Netherlands questions who is in charge, the central government or the local government, also relationship between state and church. On the international level, power and weaknesses on the international stage. We'll speak about the relationship with Britain and the honeymoon of William and Mary, from which William III would be born, the story of the so-called Glorious Revolution, which was more a nickel revolution for most of the British and really a disaster for Ireland. We'll talk about the Dutch Anglo Wars on sea. Also the relationship of the Netherlands and the United States will be part of this lecture, starting with the recognition of the independence of the states and the foundation of New York. We'll talk about Decima, the isle where the Dutch were allowed to have trade with Japan, and also one of the black pages of the Dutch history, the colonization, I've got an L, sorry for that, the colonization of Indonesia and Suriname. Lecture 5 is about the erosion of the Republic and the transition to monarchy. We'll speak about the reasons and the consequences of the economic declines. One of them being the shift in mentality of the upper class. It's not only about money anymore, also about science and art. New division in society, those who support the House of Orange versus those who support the ideas of the French Revolution. And the Netherlands is walked over by Napoleon. That's how the Netherlands becomes a kingdom. After the French left, Belgium became part of the Netherlands, not without problems and conflict. And we will talk about the role and the parliament, which responsibilities do have each of those two. And that's stated in the Constitution of 1848, which also is a natural end point of the lecture. The last lecture, number 6, about the people, how many were there, where did they come from, did they stay where they lived or did they move, what did they do, and also quite important, division in society. One area was much richer than the other, but also within a certain area there were different social groups with different income. But not only money, also ideology did split Dutch society. And we'll finish lecture 6 with the impact of the rulers and the people on the natural environment, from nature to culture and urbanization. In all those lectures 3, 4, 5 and 6, there's place for questions since it's done by Zoom. What does it cost and how to order? Before answering that question, I would like to invite you to have a look at this rye in my neighborhood. I saw this rye end of 2020, and I thought this might be symbolic for that year 2020. Not too much energy. Yeah, the fight against Corona was just the starting point. But now we are in 2021 and the riot does look much more happy, more energy, and hopefully this will be the symbol for 2021, the year of the fight against the corona. And I really hope that this fight will not be limited to the wealthy countries. And that's why I decided to have donated 50% of the revenues of lectures 3 to 6 to Doctors Without Borders. So then we can come to the question, what does it cost? If you order just one lecture, it will be 70, and the more you order, the cheaper it gets. And how to order? Start with donating 50% of the amount due to Doctors Without Borders. Visit their websites. They will tell you how you can donate. And once done, step 1, please send a mail to me, tonvergarderen@dutchculturetours.com. Well, I think that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon. Goodbye.